Hi, we'd like to welcome you to our new podcast, Tales of a TC. I am joined by Ella Ray.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So we are bringing this podcast to life in the hopes of sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a TC, and just kind of educating everybody out there about what goes on behind the scenes of a transaction. And I'm really excited to do this.
Me too, because there's so much that goes on that people don't know about.
So true. So true. So this week I want to talk about one of my first deals that I ever worked. And this deal came to us by a wholesaler who came in and said, hey, I negotiated this contract and it wasn't worth what I said it was. And so now I'm not making a fee. I just need the buyer to buy this deal.
Oh, that sounds so familiar.
Yes. Maybe the seller wasn't honest about the condition of the home. All kinds of things happen in this situation. But it felt really straightforward. It was like a $60,000 seller finance purchase that was supposed to close in 4 weeks. I mean, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, you would think.
Yes.
I can only imagine what went on with this deal.
Yes. So first, being a new TC, I did not know that nationwide title companies are probably not who you want to go with for title. So they didn't know the area, they didn't have the contacts, and everything was really slow. And I thought they were kind of crazy when it took us like 3 weeks to get a title report.
Wow.
But coming to find out in Pennsylvania, things move a little slower because there's no requirement on title for the timeline that places are required to provide that information, like for the county and stuff like that. So the county works at the pace the county works at. So we got the title report back, and there's actually a water lien on the property for stormwater. And we thought, no problem. We'll get a payoff and we will close out the transaction. Well, that payoff took 6 months to get.
Wow, that is a long time.
It is. It is a long time to call a water company every single day, following up on it. And so it was like this vicious cycle of first the lady was on maternity leave on a county this small, only one person does this job.
Gotta love it.
And then the lady would send the information over to their attorney that was handling the situation. But by time the attorney got to it, everything was like expired from the water lady. And so it was like this whole round and round circle.
Cycle.
Yes. And what's craziest is that it ended up only being like a couple $1,000s. Like, so like at some point we should have just put like $5,000 in escrow and just let it sit there and wait. But we couldn't even get like a rough estimate of how much this could be. And with all of the back and forth, we thought it was going to be crazy high. And the buyers are like, I'm only paying $60,000 for this. Like, I'm not really like interested in all of this. And the sellers were elderly. So on their daily updates, which they requested, I had to leave a answering machine message for them, in which then they would call me back, but they would be upset if I didn't leave like a whole status update on the answering machine, so that whoever didn't get it or whoever I didn't speak to on the phone didn't get the same message.
This was so painful. So not only were you calling the water company every day, you also had to call the sellers every day.
Yes. Well, and to be fair, everyone thought this would be a pretty like straightforward, not such a long process
Yeah.
situation. Um, and so I think what's kind of funniest in this whole thing is that since it took so long, the buyer had requested, because they were just renovating the property, the buyer just requested that they could go ahead and start taking the trash out of the property so they could start getting ready for the remodel. And the seller said yes, but under one condition, which is the craziest condition I have ever
Take
heard.
a picture of the garbage and show us every day.
No, thankfully, no. Well, it's weirder than that. So the thing that they wanted were the toilets out of the house. So there was some construction materials in the property and stuff like that. So when the seller originally tells me this, I assume that these are brand new toilets that they were going to install into the property.
Oh my gosh.
They
Wow.
were not brand new toilets that they wanted to install in the property.
Oh my goodness. Was it because their line of thought was like, we don't want the water bill to increase, so take the toilets out?
No. So I guess they had bought these toilets like a year previous. They've been used by a tenant, not even like they didn't even use the toilet. A tenant used the toilet, and they had the buyer go and take the toilets out of the house and deliver them to their new house.
Are you kidding me?
Can you imagine doing that addendum? Like, sellers. Oh,
Well, that is an odd request. That is crazy for some used toilets. Toilets are not that expensive. I mean, it depends, but jeez. So how long did it take you to close this transaction in total? About 7 months?
yep.
And that was one of your first? Or that was your first?
No, that was probably about my like 10th. It was definitely the longest, like most drawn out transaction I've ever done. But yeah, the toilets were kind of like an over the top for me. Um, and
Excuse
so
me.
now I tell people like you can put anything in an addendum. Like the
You
seller
literally can, yeah.
want
That
you to paint the walls purple. Sure.
wow, that is quite a deal. I don't think I've ever had one last that long, thankfully. But that is all that back and forth. I mean, when you really sit down and you quantify like all of the time that you spend on these deals, making these phone calls, doing this follow up, getting this information, people always say, oh, TCs charge so much. Regular TCs are only like 300, 400. Well, regular TCs aren't doing that. I can promise you that. It's very time consuming.
It is. And you never know walking in. It could be an easy open shut case that
Yeah.
moves quickly, or you could be spending 6 months on a file trying to chase down a payoff.
Delivering toilets.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that is a doozy. I can thankfully say that I haven't had any that were that crazy, but I think you're right. You never know what you're going to walk into with these deals. They can seem I've had deals that will seem so straightforward and then things start popping up like liens or judgments or we find out somebody is deceased that wasn't supposed to be deceased, like all kinds of stuff happens in these deals. And then I have ones that I look at the contract and I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be a real doozy. And it's like easy breezy, it's done 2 weeks, a week and a half. So you really don't know. This game is I'm sorry, this line of work, I think, and that's why it's so challenging and so much fun, is because you really don't know. You just kind of like you never know what you're gonna get. Right?
That's so true. And sometimes it's like opening Pandora's box. Like you kind of take the lid off and hopefully all of the pieces kind of go in order and make sense. And
Yeah.
then, like you said, sometimes it's just like a you're learning as you go, even though, both of us have been doing this for so long
I know.
and we've worked hundreds of transactions. I still learn something new every week.
Me too. Every deal, I still learn something new. And I think that's probably why I've been doing it for so long, because it still keeps my attention. It's not the same boring, mundane like when I was working as an EA. I mean, it was kind of in the same realm where everything was different, but it was like going to the office. I kind of already knew what to expect. I knew what my job was. Here, it's different. Every deal is insane. I mean, I love it. I have so many so many deals that were going wrong at the very last minute, and all of a sudden it's the scramble to like save the deal, and it's like, yes, we did it, we're closed, and it's a celebration, and then another deal plops on my desk, and I'm like, okay, let's start over, let's do this again. So it's a great line of work if for somebody who really loves challenges and loves problem solving and loves critical thinking, because you need all of that for this kind of work. There's nothing here that's cut and dry. There's nothing here that's cookie cutter. It's pretty much you're flying by the seat of your pants, and you're gathering all this information and creating this repository in your mind. So that way, later on down the line, when you get a deal and you see something and you're like, oh, I remember when I saw that last time. Let's get ahead of this and let's start working on, figuring this out before it becomes a problem. So it's for me, I love it. And I can see why investors want to use TCs instead of just doing it on their own, because unless they've done it on their own, they don't really know, even still, they're just like, it's not that easy. You can't just give things to a title company and expect them to do everything that a TC is going to do for you.
Well, and I think that there's also this, like, I have a cash wholesaler that I work with, and he runs every single deal through me because my favorite part, I do like the roller coaster of the problems, but I
Mm,
also love the people. Like, I love helping settle the seller's, issues. And I truly do believe that real estate investing does help solve serious problems for people.
it does.
And doing that, like, I don't think I make a terrible wholesaler because I get way too emotionally connected, but I
Yeah.
make a fantastic transaction coordinator because I get emotionally invested. And
Yeah.
so, calling the sellers every day, especially if you have a cash contract that's moving quick, or you have a sub two that is a train wreck that we're trying to put all the pieces together,
Hmm.
that relationship with the seller is everything.
It really is. It
And
really is. And
investors don't have time for that.
no, they don't. And oftentimes I feel that I am the one who talks to the seller the most. Aside from the wholesaler, they're really not talking to the buyer ever. They're really not talking to the title company except for whenever the title company needs something from them. So they feel more comfortable knowing that there's somebody who is looking out for them and looking out for their best interests and making sure that they're protected when we walk away from this closing table. And not just the sellers but the buyers as well, right? It's not just about, oh, let's just get this house under contract and buy it and get a check for our assignment fee. There's somebody's livelihood at the end of this line that needs to be watched out for, and that's the most important part. And I think that's what I take a lot of pride into, is just knowing that here I am, I've been placed in this transaction. Yes, I'm working for the buyer, but I'm working essentially for everyone to make sure that everyone is covered and that the seller's not going to have any issues if, God forbid, the buyer's abducted by aliens or whatever, that the seller has the appropriate recourse and the documents available to them, and they understand what it is that they've signed and what it is that they're doing. So I think it's always good. I feel like we're buffers, so to speak, between everything. If this, I feel like if, and especially in sub two transactions where there's so many moving parts, and it's so different from a conventional transaction, that the sellers really need somebody to be there for them to kind of explain everything and how everything is supposed to work. I can't even imagine, because I know that there's plenty of them, transactions where there's a wholesaler and a seller on a sub two but there was no TC. it to me, it's mind-boggling because I feel like there's just so much that goes on that you can't prepare the seller in a way that a TC can as a wholesaler, I feel.
I agree. Well, and sometimes like their goals don't always align with the buyers. Like
Yeah.
there's times I've dealt with a seller that like I'll go back to a buyer and be like, I'm not sure this is the right seller. Like,
Mhm.
because it's imperative that the seller is on board. The seller is okay with it. Sometimes, the wholesaler doesn't disclose everything, or you can tell that the seller's kind of volatile. And
Mhm.
that's a long-term relationship for your buyer too. That just as important as it is to make sure the seller's protected and the seller has everything they need, it's also important to make sure that the buyer's not marrying someone crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, I've seen that. "Oh, no, I don't wanna give up my information. I'm not giving up my mortgage portal. I'm not," and that's where, as a TC, we have to make sure that everybody understands what's going on, and the buyer definitely needs to know, like, "Hey, this is what the situation is with the seller. You're gonna be walking into this for 30 years, 27 years, whatever it ends up being, to have to deal." It is like a marriage. It's probably longer than most marriages. You're gonna have to deal with this for the rest of this time. Some buyers have no problems with it, and other ones are just like, "I don't know how this is gonna work." And, it's unfortunate though, because in instances like that, where there's a wholesaler, if the end buyer is putting up EMD and it's non-refundable, and then they come to find out that the seller is just like absolutely a red seller, like doesn't want to give up any information, you either have to risk losing that money because it's not an issue of there's no free and clear title, right? It's not an issue of that there's other things that came up that weren't agreed upon. It's now that this seller is, unfortunately not the best seller. So do you forfeit your EMD of like $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, or decide that you're going to take a gamble and deal with the seller and set up a servicing company and do everything that you have to do in order to mitigate contact with the seller, right? But still, sub twos are very, very finicky like that. And you have to make sure that people understand what kind of personalities they're dealing with too.
Well, and I think that this is why it's imperative that you work with an experienced TC if you're an end buyer. And first of all, don't jump. I would encourage not jumping around on TCs, because the reality is that it's difficult for someone to learn your flow and what you're looking for and what's okay with you and what's not okay with you if you're changing a TC on every single transaction. And then I like for my clients and I to have a conversation before they sign an assignment agreement. I've had clients that are going to sign before they get a purchase agreement.
That is mind boggling to me. That's
And
absolutely crazy.
the
I don't understand that.
And we like to encourage that they have a couple additional terms in there to protect them. Like we require that we get access to the mortgage portal before closing.
Oh yeah, all the time.
That we require because so many wholesalers were blocking communication with the seller. So now we have it written into the assignment agreement that, we need to have access and communication with the seller. And none of that is to like cut the wholesaler out or anything like that, but
Oh,
it's a partnership between the buyer and the seller that it's really difficult to start that partnership and know if you have a red seller if the wholesaler says, oh, you can't contact the seller. You can't talk to the realtor. Like, it's
mm-mm.
crazy.
That's a red flag for me. Like in all of the deals that I've done, I've only ever had one wholesaler do that. And I just kept on pushing, pushing, pushing. I was like, we're not going to close this until we get a hold of the seller and we're able to talk to them and get access to the portal and everything else. Because, and funny enough, that seller ended up walking away because the wholesaler was threatening them. And they just kind of threw their hands up in there and were like, I'll just let them foreclose on me. And it was a really sad situation. But for me, that is a huge red flag. And I will always tell a lot of my clients are wholesalers who will bring me into the assignment, right? They'll bring it to me after it's been assigned, but they'll tell their end buyer, you can get this assignment, but you have to use this TC because they know that I'm going to be making sure that everybody is covered. So when I see the assignment contract, I know, okay, fine. They've shown them the purchase and sales agreement. Everything is good. But when I have end buyers come back to me and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to sign this assignment contract, and this is the wholesaler," and so I'm like, "Let me see the contracts. Let me see the assignment contract. Let me see the." "Oh, I don't have the purchase contract." "What do you mean you don't have the purchase contract? How are you going to sign the assignment contract if you haven't seen the purchase contract? They could be promising your firstborn. You have no idea." So, but as I joke about it, but it's really, you really have to make sure that you understand what those initial terms are between the seller and the wholesaler, and that needs to be very transparent. You can't have a one-page assignment contract and then have never even seen the purchase and sale contract. Like, that's crazy to me. So I agree with you on all those points. We absolutely make sure that we have access to the portal. I go in there and I make sure, okay, is there any escrow analysis that's showing that this PITI is going to go up? Did they, what's going on with the insurance? Like, all of that stuff. And it's crucial for the buyer to know this before they end up closing on that deal, because you go in with a set agreement of like, okay, the PIT is going to be $1,500 and whatever. Granted, the insurance might change, but when you go from $1,500 to now you have an escrow analysis that says you're jumping up to $1,800 a month, and your cash flow is only like $200. I mean, that's crucial. So I think it's, having a clear line of communication between the TC and the seller is imperative, no matter which side brings in the TC, really. If it's with if the TC already came with the wholesaler, then that TC needs to be super transparent with the end buyer and let them know, like, we're not biased. We're not playing one side or the other. We're supposed to be working in tandem with both sides, or all three sides rather. So that's still something. I mean, and every TC operates differently. I've seen TCs that are like, "No, we're not going to give you access," and I'm like, we kind of need to know this information before we can close. So it's but I almost feel like this is the wild wild west in some ways, and every TC kind of operates the way that they feel comfortable. Part of that is for lack of knowing any better, I would say, maybe inexperience. When I first started, I didn't realize that I was going to have to talk to, everybody at the same time. Or it was like, "Oh, well, this person hired me, the wholesaler hired me, but now there's this end buyer. Am I charging both people?" And, as you grow into this role, you start becoming more familiar with what really should be working, and what should fit. And I think, there's always two parties to a transaction. You can't have a transaction without the seller and the buyer, right? Like, it's just, you have to work with everyone. So it's fun though. It took a while for me to learn that, but I think now that I know that, however many hundreds of transactions later, it's definitely benefited everybody who's on these, you know, and I think that's important. Our role, even though it seems small, it's really pretty big in the grand scheme of things, because we're the people who are kind of protecting the visionaries, the investors, be like, "Hey, no, yes, I understand what you're trying to do, but you can't do that because of X, Y, and Z," right? And making sure that everybody is doing things on the up and up. And I think it's important. We're constantly learning, constantly growing, and the more we learn, the more ahead of the curve we are, the easier it is for us to protect everybody. So,
100%.
yeah.
Well, and it lets us bring the experience of hundreds of transactions to anyone, whether it's their first transaction or their 50th transaction. They have like all of that wisdom standing beside them as they go through that.
Yes, exactly. Because an investor, I mean, granted, yes, there are investors that are doing a lot of transactions, but more than likely, they're not doing hundreds the way that we are, at the volume and the capacity that we are. So we're constantly learning something with every transaction. And those are all those things that, as an investor, you don't know what you don't know. Well, we're here to know those things for you and help you in that process. So that's important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I definitely think we should talk about escrow analysis next week because that is a big hotbed topic right now. Um, and it's like my favorite thing to talk about. But yeah, no, thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
And we'll do it same time next week.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
All right.